Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Jessie J, titled Alive. You know, it really sucks to be branded as a wannabe, particularly when it's not fair and it's not true. And that's always been the thought that's played in my head whenever I think about Jessie J, who many critics very early on branded as a Katy Perry wannabe, which I've always considered patently unfair. To this day, I'll still have a hard time understanding why on earth Katy Perry got incredibly popular with plenty of number one hits, and Jessie J, well, she didn't. And in the end, I'm forced to concede it's due to Dr. Luke's ability to writing incredibly catchy hooks and very good melodies for Miss Perry. Because, let me tell you this, it sure as hell wasn't for her live vocals, or superb lyrics, or strikingly original personality, if you know what I mean. Jessie J, well, on the other hand, while she has worked with Max Martin and Dr. Luke in the past, she also takes a major hand in writing her own material. And unlike Katy Perry, she actually has a personality and great voice outside of the auto-tune. Coupled with her real feistiness and her desire to connect with her fan base online, I have a ton of respect for Jessie J, and I genuinely like a lot of her music. Hell, I nearly put Domino, her big hit from last year, nearly on my top 10 list of the best hit songs of 2012. I want her to be more in the modern pop landscape than just the UK's version of Katy Perry. And you know what? I seriously think she's capable of getting there. So, the question that I've always pondered is, why doesn't Jessie J stick out for me more than she does already? Working the middle ground between Katy Perry and Pink, I've always liked Jessie J's songwriting for the most part, but if I suspect if I'm going to get a little bit deeper into some of my issues with her, some of it might come down that she doesn't quite do enough unique to stand out against the rest of the crowd, either on a songwriting or instrumental basis. Sure, she's got some really weird lyrics, but this is 2013. Weird lyrics are pretty much expected at this point in the modern pop landscape. If I think Jessie J wants to distinguish herself in a big way on the pop landscape, it needs to come from her instrumentation, either going in, let's say, a rock direction, like with what Natalia Kills or Kesha tried to do, or maybe returning to the traditionalist R&B of her roots. So, with all that in mind, what do we see from Jessie J's sophomore output called Alive? Well, it turns out that both my initial predictions were right, because Jessie J apparently took both of my suggestions and went to both rock and R&B on her new album Alive. And the results were certainly interesting, if a little bit messy. And while I'm fairly certain at the end of this review I am going to recommend this album, I'm also aware that there are some pretty big issues with it that make it not quite as strong as I was hoping for. And once again, the frustrating problem here is that I don't think any of these issues are entirely Jessie J's fault, which is the real sad thing about this whole endeavor. But let's start with the obvious positives here. And I think the best place to start is actually in the songwriting. For a pop R&B act, I think Jessie J is a pretty damn solid pop songwriter, and she's got some serious technical chops, at least in terms of songwriting. While I wouldn't quite say every line she's ever written is perfect, sometimes she comes across a little abrasive or a little grating when she's not trying to be. Overall, I think her lyrics are a great natural fit for pop music. One of the things I've always found really fun with Jessie J, for example, is that more often than not, her metaphors can be surprisingly sexual. And yeah, sure, there's plenty of that on Alive, but for the most part, Jessie J is writing a potent empowerment album in the vein of an act like Pink or Beyonce. And like Janelle Monáe ahead of her, Jessie J has absolutely no problems putting her bisexuality in full view to inform her subject material. In fact, I'd argue I Miss Her is undoubtedly the best song on this album because it's both unique and delivered with blunt, heartfelt honesty. You can buy into the fact that the events in this song probably actually happened, and Jessie J does a very good job nailing the emotions of that particular event. Now, that blunt force that informs Jessie J's songwriting has been a common criticism of a lot of her work. It's been branded as too raw and too open and too honesty, a lot in the times of the vein like Pink and Eminem. And yes, it's all of these things. But you know what? I would argue that it matches the tone of her songwriting quite well, particularly in her vocal delivery. Jessie J has always been a very solid, very powerful singer and belter in the R&B vein. And dear Christ, She goes for it here and throws everything and anything into her material. There really isn't a lot of subtlety here, I will agree with that, but Jessie J has a lot of raw passion and charisma in her delivery, and she's got enough emotional range in her voice that she still comes across as likable when she's trying to sell her material. It's very reminiscent in my eyes of early Pink, except while Jessie J tends to have a little bit more of a foot in R&B, and while some of Misunderstood and Try This can occasionally come across as a little bit sexless, Jessie J has absolutely no problem infusing her material with raw sexuality. And I really like that because it makes her material come across as more organic and real and surprisingly relatable. Unfortunately, as much as Jessie J's early performances on this album remind me of Pink, there are definitely moments on this album that remind me of later Pink as well, particularly The Truth About Love. Now, as a big, longtime fan of Pink, I had very few kind things to say about The Truth About Love, which I just think was a terrible sellout album. But one of my biggest issues with it was that Pink was often scream singing at the top of her vocal range, and look, it didn't sound good, it sounded painful. And unfortunately, we got a bit of this on Jessie J's new album, starting with the second single, It's My Party. As a singer myself, I know how much it hurts to sing in that range, and when it's clear that Jessie J is really throwing everything in the kitchen sink into these songs, I just can't help but wince because I know how much that hurts. Jessie J sounds best when she stays in her belting range, and when she stays within that range where she can comfortably hit the notes. And trying to go above it, it just doesn't sound good, it doesn't work very well for her. Of course, bringing up The Truth About Love from Pink also gives me room to talk about one of the other things that shows up from that album here with Jessie J, and it's rather unfortunate that that came over. The instrumentation and the production. I'll start with the instrumentation because it's more of a mixed bag. On the stronger songs of this album, it's acoustic or piano driven, or driven with a real potent rock edge with some roaring guitars, and I really dug that. But this is where Jessie J is at her absolute best. Her raw, forceful voice is complemented by uncluttered and straightforward, hard-edged instrumentation, and she gets some very strong pop song anthems out of this. And you know what? I really dug that rock guitar, and there's even a few guitar solos on this track that makes me believe that she could really push that particular direction. And you know what? I even dug the 80s synthesizer hook on Daydream. Now again, I'm a sucker for 80s synths, but it actually comes off a little bit better here than I was expecting. But it's clear that Jessie J is making a pop album, and it's one that's wedged very much between electronic rock and R&B. And the two don't always mix very well. And sure, there are moments where the more pop-inspired tracks can build a decent vibe, a little bit slower, a little bit more stripped down, but too often this mix is cluttered with a swarm of electronic effects and fuzz that just does nothing but obscure the real niceness of the melody line and strip away some of that funkiness or rock edge that Jessie J is trying to cultivate on her songs. It just doesn't fit. It comes across as too busy. And the production is even worse. I don't know who mixed this album, but they need to be beaten with a shillelagh because there are so many points on the mix where it's overcompressed and overloaded with sound that it doesn't need to be there. This is an album that is really hurt by its overproduction, and what's worse, some numbskull thought it would be a smart idea to shove Jessie J's voice further back in the mix on some of the choruses where her voice is forced to clash with the extraneous electronic nonsense that doesn't need to be there. Sure, Jessie J does her damnedest to fight against this and sing really hard against it, but the point is that she shouldn't have to. And I get the point that this album would have landed with a lot more impact if the mix was just simplified and Jessie J was allowed to stay center and stage on all of her songs. And you know, for some ungodly reason, this also comes out in the guest star appearances as well. Jay Sean delivers another abysmally bad verse with terrible rhymes, and while Dizzy Rascal does spit with some impressive fluency, he clashes with the beat on the song really quite poorly. The worst song on this album, however, comes courtesy of Becky G, a young British female rapper who seems to be following in the Cher Lloyd tradition of obnoxious self-aggrandizement and terrible rapping. And not even Jessie J can do much to salvage this sloppily written kiss-off track that seems more bitchy than awesome. It just comes across a wash. And Jessie J really tries with a good hook and a decent enough chorus, but still, ugh. But look, in summary, there's a lot to like on Jessie J's Alive. I stand by that. Most of these elements are courtesy of Jessie J herself, who really does deliver here in a big way. She's the best parts of her album. I just wish that her guest stars, her instrumentation, and her production were up to her level, and on a level to match her talent. This is an album that has some great songs on it. I stand by that, and it shows that Jessie J does actually have a distinctive identity in the pop star landscape. But her label's terrible choice of singles are going to ensure that people consider her as a Pink wannabe now instead of a Katy Perry wannabe, which, to repeat, as I said before, isn't fair and isn't true. And you know what? With that in mind, this album is going to get a 7 out of 10 from me, and a recommendation. Folks, I want you to go check out Jessie J's Alive. And you know what? Since Jessie J is one of the more internet-savvy celebrities, and if for some reason she happens to come across this video, well, Jessie J, I'm a fan of what you're doing. Keep it up. I see some real hope from you. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful for that. If there's anything I could do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like to check out, just drop something down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to take a look. Until then, see you next time.